Well done, everyone, for getting in your PPEs. You should have your feedback now. I just wanted to say a special congratulations to those guys who were really strict on themselves, adhered to the time limits, and didn't look up answers in advance. This lesson is going to take you through our dirt lesson for the PPE. So make sure you have your feedback in front of you so you can look at your own answers. If you have a purple pen, great. If you don't have a purple pen, if you wrote your exam, if you could have a different color pen, that'd be fantastic. Or if you are going to type your dirt time tasks, please use a purple font. That would be great. Thanks. I know a lot of you guys feel like purple penning and the dirt time isn't really worthwhile, but it's really important for you to understand that you doing an assessment doesn't really help you learn. It just helps me to know where you're currently at. In order for you to make this useful, you've got to reflect on your work, you've got to take in the feedback, and you've got to try to improve your work, make it the best that you can be, and really kind of accelerate your learning by pinpointing the areas that you know that you need to now focus on developing. So these are some of the answers that you could have had for question 1. I'm really pleased to say that most people got 4 out of 4 for this question. Just make sure you are using full sentences and not writing too much. You don't need quotes. You don't need to infer things. You literally just paraphrase exactly what is on the paper. Okay. If you didn't get 4 out of 4, just purple pen any other answers that you didn't get. Most of you did question 2 quite well. You looked at the extract that was given to you on the page, so it's not like you could maybe mistake it and go elsewhere in the extract, but it's really, really important that you focus on the question. The question here was about the boy playing. So how does he use the language to describe the boy playing in the evening? So it wasn't, you had to make sure you weren't talking about other things, or if you were, you then made that relevant to the boy playing. So I'm going to show you where some of you made mistakes and how to improve your answer to these questions. The other thing I will say is you need to get better at using subject terminology accurately. So make sure that you are revising things like what are metaphors, alliteration, personification, and make sure you're using those terms more and that you're using them accurately. The other thing is you need to focus on the effect. So you're not just saying that this is a simile, but actually what is the effect on the reader and how does it affect the way we see the boy playing or the type of game that he's playing. Okay, so the first thing you should do with question 2 is annotate. I just literally write down anything that comes into my mind, and then when I actually come to write it, then I group my ideas. So the first thing that stood out to me was this idea of tumbled fragments, because the whole story really is told in fragments. We have fragments of reality, fragments of imagination, so broken bits of bottles, shattered marbles, so lots and lots of kind of images that are fragmented or broken. I picked up on the simile, like shattered marbles. Again, this blurring of what's real and what something is just like, or what it's like in his imagination. And then I'm looking at this list of verbs, so making, balancing, building, and the use of the present participle, the ing, rather than the past tense, which would be an ed, shows that this is a continuous game. He's completely engrossed in it. The other thing that I picked up on is the use of really long sentences in this, lots of kind of longer lists. And I think that kind of reflects the boy's energy and effort that's going into creating this world. He's kind of getting carried away. The last of the sunlight. Now, sunlight to me always has connotations of hope and light and warmth and very positive things, but this is the last of the sunlight. So I think to me that hints a change in the tone, that things are going to become darker, but as to how it fits in with the boys' play, I'm not quite sure yet. I'm just kind of making a note of it. I picked up on the blackbirds and before, that kind of very plosive alliteration of the b, and it kind of interrupts, quite forcefully interrupts his game. And I also picked up on this idea of the 9 chimes. It's quite late, but the chiming of a bell kind of signals that there is a change, because things start to go much darker. We had the last of the sunlight. We've had shadows were growing. Again, when we have connotations of shadows, it's things like things are lurking in shadows, or the kind of darkness. So all quite negative connotations. Then we have this really kind of bizarre, the lamppost looked like a tall man, and then the man looked like a lamppost. So again, it's really difficult to know what is real and what isn't. So there's a real blurring of the kind of imagination and what's real. This black hat that quivered with beaks and feathers. So for me, when I read the word quiver, that's kind of trembling or shaking, and I associate that with fear, to quiver with fear. And this idea of it being with beaks and feathers, I mean, we're quite used to seeing feathers in hats, but I thought it was interesting that there were beaks in it as well. And then here this phrase, face to face. So when you come face to face with something, it's kind of confrontational, it's a little bit threatening. And then the last thing I picked up on was the idea that he, the man, was planted in the pavement, which I thought was interesting because we're normally on a pavement. So once we've annotated, then you want to go ahead and group your ideas. So the first thing I wanted to focus on was the idea of tumbled fragments. So I would talk about the fact that extracts is full of fragments of reality and imagination, and this idea of fragments of innocence that are mixed with a more sinister undertone, particularly with when the man interrupts the boys playing. He's wearing that black hat quivered with beaks and feathers. So we have fragments of birds. So to link that to the question, which is describing the boy playing, I would talk about his seemingly innocent game, this imaginative, very playful game with the mention of marbles, could turn into something more sinister. And the fact that he's playing with broken glass like shattered marbles, so it kind of suggests that nothing is whole, like we'd never get the whole story. I would also develop that idea about the fact that it becomes more sinister by looking at the word quivered, which again, as I said, would normally be associated with trembling with fear. So it makes the man sound more menacing, especially as he doesn't just have the feathers, which are generally decorative, but beaks too. So it very much has that voodoo kind of tribal black magic feel. Maybe a tribal person wearing kind of beaks and bones of dead animals. Also the fact that it says he came face to face with him, so very confrontational, very threatening. So the boys playing definitely becomes something more sinister. Make sure that you are linking it back to that question of the boy playing. In terms of language features and techniques, you definitely talk about the use of similes, that blurring of the line between reality, what something is, and imagination, so what it is like or what the boy imagines it to be. So this blurring kind of continues between the lamppost and the tall, thin man. And it's really unclear if he was actually a man or a lamppost, and that's made even more confusing by that final phrase, planted in the pavement, and that use of the preposition in rather than on. So the imaginative nature of the boys' game, of the boys playing, makes it difficult for the reader to distinguish between fact and fiction. And that's further developed by the fact that the writer chooses to set it at night, the 9 chimes being 9 p.m. and the orange light that hadn't yet switched on. So there is a lack of light, creating that lack of certainty. So make sure that you are linking it back to the question. So you're talking about the imaginative nature of the boys playing. You could then talk about that extended list of verbs that we pulled out, the making, balancing and building. The boy is completely engrossed in constructing his own world. And again, that use of present participles suggests that he does this over and over. And in his world, he is in charge, he is king, so he keeps on building this empire. Again, linking that back to the question of describe the boy playing, he's playing in such a way that he's so engrossed in his own world and creating his own world that he's kind of shut off from everything else. Although I've put this as a separate point with the sentence forms, if I was writing this out as a full answer, I would actually put in the sentence forms when I talk about that extended list of verbs. The fact that it's a long list, he's kind of getting carried away. He's very enthusiastic in terms of his playing and creating his world. This answer is taken directly from the AQA exam mark scheme. So you can see it's color coded. You can look at the different aspects that are included into that one paragraph. So please go ahead now, look at my feedback that I've given you, think about the feedback that I've given you in this lesson, and try to extend and improve your response. Everyone should have some purple penning, some reflection. Unless you got 8 out of 8, then there's definitely ways that you can improve your answer. So think about your use of technical terms, think about how you've explained the effect on the reader, and think about linking your answers back to the question. I've listed here some other ideas that you could discuss. Again, that is taken from the exam mark scheme. Again, question 3 in the structure continues to be a kind of stumbling block for a lot of you. It's really important that we're thinking about the order in which we are told the story and how that keeps us interested. So I'm going to talk you through my annotations and my ideas. Again, I'll give you an example from the exam board mark scheme, but make sure that you are looking at your own response and trying to see where you could improve your answer, and think about structure in terms of the order in which we're told things. So when we're thinking about structure, always important to read the first section. It tells us that this is the midpoint in a story. So it's not the exposition, it's not at the beginning, and it's not the denouement right at the end. This is third person. We know it's third person narrative, and it's told in a chronological order. So the first paragraph, the focus is definitely on the boy. And if you look, I've circled at least 5 times where the sentence starts with he. So there's that definite focus on the boy by use of that personal pronoun. There's lots of kind of imagination and creation. There's quite a positive atmosphere being created. That you have that kind of innocent game because of the simile with the marbles, and also the reference to candy floss. But there is a juxtaposition of the vinegar and the candy floss together, which I thought was quite interesting. And again, ending that first opening paragraph on that last of the sunlight, so hinting that there is a change coming. Then there is a change of focus. That game is interrupted by those blackbirds, that plosive b, which interrupts the game quite forcefully. There's more of an ominous kind of blurring of reality and imagination. It becomes much more sinister. It then moves into this dialogue, which is important because it's the first time that the man and the boy kind of really engage. So at first you think that the boy's scared, there's some kind of elements of fear, he doesn't answer, he gets ready to run, but then he kind of digs in his heels and we get this much more brave, kind of hopeful boy coming out. So that dialogue is important. There is a change, because at first when we're scared for the boy, we see that actually he's kind of brave and standing up for himself, so maybe a slight kind of release of tension. But as soon as he looks down and he sees those tiny creatures scuttling, the tone becomes much, much darker and continues to do so right to the end. So we have things like the sky was darkening, we have elements of darkness and references to darkness all the way through. He knew something was wrong is followed by lots of questions, lots of interrogative sentences. So it's building this sense of mystery or confusion or maybe even panic. When the boy thunders back, we go into anger, so a much more kind of intense emotion, so a building up of emotions because he thunders back and he shouts. And then at the end, right towards the end, we have this twist when the man's face glowed and he says, "You have." So that really short sentence is kind of stands out, and it is the plot twist. So in the end, and make sure you are talking about the end, it finishes in gloom, kind of despairing mode, and lots of negatives are used, with again the man was a lamppost again. So a real blurring of that reality, because even the boy couldn't be sure. So the boy can't be sure, the readers can't be sure, and that's what keeps us engaged, that what is real and what is actually happening. So I've said before, always start with an overall statement. So in this case, the writer structures the text to create a blur between the imaginary and the real, so the reader never is really quite sure what to believe. Okay, it can be as simple as that. So the beginning really focuses on the boy. It seems like an ordinary scene. The boy's playing on his own in this kind of imaginary world that he's in charge of. And he seems to block out the real world. He's totally absorbed in making and building. The repetition of that pronoun he, so the world revolves around him and nothing else. But the concept of opposites, imagination versus reality, is developed. We have the vinegary and the candy floss, so the bitter and sweet, and that idea of innocent play compared to the more sinister game that it changes into later on. So it's all about the boy and introducing this idea of opposites and the imagination versus reality. Then the first focus change, his kind of self-absorbed isolation is broken and intruded on by that plosive blackbirds, the explosive sounds kind of forcing their way into his world, kind of bringing him out into the wider world, which is further supported by the 9 charms that mark the end of his innocent play. They definitely mark that change in tone. And the whole extract becomes progressively darker. So from the first paragraph and that mention of the last of the sunlight to shadows and then the sky darkening, to the final paragraph where the extract ends in gloom. So it reflects this kind of growing sense of doom that is kind of being developed throughout the extract. So in the middle we have this dialogue. We're expecting the boy to be frightened, but he's brave, so the reader thinks he's going to be okay. But at the point where we think he's going to be okay and he goes home, we think he's going to be safe because he's home. We have this short series of interrogatives, so this creates this sense of panic and confusion, and that really keeps the reader interested, because where he should be safe, he's not, and he has to return to the mound and the man. So there is this unexpected twist with the very short "you have" sentence. So just like the reader, the boy couldn't be sure, and that's what keeps us interested, this idea of what is real and what is imaginative and what's going to happen to all the people. And finally, the ending. It ends on the reader being in this state of confusion, and there's almost like a kind of circular narrative that happens. We go back to that blurring of what is real and what is imagined. So going back to that overall statement where the writer structures the text to create a blur between the imaginary and the real, and we definitely see that with the ending and that boy being on his own again. At the beginning, he's on his own because he wants to create this world of his own, but at the end, he's kind of abandoned. He's left on his own. So here is a model answer that's taken from the exam board mark scheme. Now, this answer is a kind of shortened version. You would be expected to write more than just this, but it gives you an idea of what they're looking for. Again, this is based on the exam board and not my notes, but it does give you a kind of structure to follow in terms of what they're looking for. Again, it's color coded, so check the margin and look at the different aspects that are included within a top mark answer. So look at the feedback that I've given you on your response and use the feedback that I've given you in this lesson to try to improve or extend your response. You will see in the blue box on this slide, I've listed other ideas that you could have discussed. These are taken directly from the exam board mark scheme. Question 4 is the to what extent, and we need to make sure that we're including analysis of language and structure, and your own personal impressions and interpretations are coming through in your response. So make sure that you're looking at the question and not just writing down your impressions. Even though the bullet points ask you to consider your own impressions, you're not just writing about your impressions. It must answer the question or address the reviewer's statement, which is the boy's game comes to life and it takes a darker and more chilling tone. Make sure you're only getting information from line 16 and below. Before you go ahead and answer, you should be just reading the extract from line 16 below and annotating with that question in mind, looking for things that stand out, that make it seem darker or that make it seem more chilling. And go ahead and write down all of your annotations. So I'll just talk you through my annotations. So firstly, the fact that the boy didn't answer and that he's ready to run makes him sound frightened. There is that sense of danger, which makes it more chilling. That idea of danger is extended when he talks about shaking him out. So shaking is quite a violent, forceful verb. The plosive d of the dust and dreams makes it sound quite abrupt. The fact that he digs his heels into the rubble, maybe he's stubborn, maybe he's brave, or maybe he's just trying to put on a brave face. I've underlined these use of adjectives, so new, better, grander, great glass. So is this a case of the boy wanting to show off? Is he boasting? He's using this kind of plosive g sound, which shows his enthusiasm, and kind of all of this all together emphasizes his vulnerability. He's just a child, and this idea of getting carried away with explaining his town kind of helps to build that image of someone who's quite childish. Also, the fact that he was worried about getting told off by his mum makes him sound childish. The reason why that's important is because it makes him sound more vulnerable to danger. So again, linking back to that idea of a darker, more chilling tone. The mention of ants and spiders and creatures, I think, make it more dark and more chilling, because these are things that are poisonous. They can attack, they can bite. The reference to scuttling suggests a hurried or panicked or chaotic kind of running, which maybe suggests fear, which can link to a darker tone. The references to dark throughout, so the sky was darkening, the repetition of darkness later on, and then it ends on that idea of it being gloomy, so quite literally getting darker. I think that the part where it says the orange light snapped on is important, because that's the point that the game really kind of becomes very real. But also, ironically, the light comes on, but it just continues to get darker. The point where he says he knew something was wrong is quite chilling. The repetition of lots of negative terms, not repetition, but there are lots of negative terms. So there were no shouts. His mum wasn't in, he had been left. They were no longer moving. So there's lots and lots of kind of negative terms being used, which can make it seem quite dark. The fact that he thundered and shouted and he's using kind of exclamation marks give it a more kind of chilling tone, because he sounds like he's quite panicked. It says here that the man's face glowed, so I was thinking that kind of made him sound very ghost-like, quite supernatural or spectral, which goes with that idea of gloom as well. And right at the end, but the man was a lamppost again. So that's quite a chilling image. So then once we've done our annotations, we then start to group our ideas. So I kind of start off by talking about the boy being in a position of power at the opening extract. It says that he was in charge. But now when we're looking at this part where the boy's game comes to life, he seems a lot more vulnerable. It becomes more chilling because there is a sense of danger that is developed, particularly when he engages with the man in that dialogue. So the boy senses danger, and that's why he didn't answer. That's why he gets ready to run. And his vulnerability is emphasized when he behaves like an excited child that's describing his new town as better, grander, and a great glass city. So that plosive gush showing his enthusiasm and his naivety. And that's further supported by the fact he's more frightened of getting told off by his mum than the man. So again, I'm just kind of creating that idea that it becomes more chilling because the boy is presented as being quite vulnerable and young. So another way it becomes more chilling are the chilling references to creatures, ants and spiders that creates an ominous tone as they could all be poisonous or bite or attack. And ironically, at this point, the orange light snapped on, signaling the point at which this innocent game becomes a darker reality. So I'm using the words from the question of chilling and darker. There are at least 4 references to the dark, so the sky was darkening, darkness is repeated, and gloom, which would support the view of a literal darker tone, but also the darkness reflects this kind of growing sense of peril, this growing sense of danger that the boy's going to find himself in, and that's what makes it more chilling for the reader. And finally, the darker tone is also developed through the use of negatives once the boy realizes that something was wrong. And try throughout your responses to embed your quotes as much as you can. So there were no shouts, she wasn't in, he'd been left, they were no longer moving, and he couldn't do something. So the situation for the boy goes from choosing to build his own imaginary world in the kind of innocent play to being abandoned in this darker and more chilling reality. But in both scenarios, he's in control. He created this game, but now he's kind of forced to play it. He must play it in order to save his mum and the people of the town. And that's made really clear, perhaps in the most chilling part of all, which is when the man tells him, "You have," in reference to the people. So the man himself is described as glowing, which gives him a supernatural kind of spectral appearance, making him more menacing and more chilling. So here is a model answer provided by the exam board for you to have a read through. Again, it's color coded, so look at the notes on the side. So now read through the feedback that I've given you on your response, your exam paper, and then use the feedback in this lesson and the ideas in the blue box which are provided by the exam board to improve and extend your answer. Okay, with question 5, you're generally given a choice between a narrative and a description, but it's really, really important to know that whether you choose the narrative or the description, the mark scheme is exactly the same. So it's really important that you are not necessarily focusing on the story or the description, but you're also keeping in mind the points on a mark scheme that are going to get you the marks that you need. So what I'm going to do is kind of take you through the mark scheme, and you're going to be completing tasks based on improving the skills that the examiners are looking for. So the question 5 mark scheme is divided into 2 parts. The first part is content and organisation. It's worth 24 marks. Your content and organisation just means what it is you're actually writing about and how you write it. Is it clear? Is it imaginative? Does it engage the reader? Okay, so that is your content, and the way that you make your writing interesting and engaging for a reader is by using lots of kind of ambitious vocabulary and lots of language devices. So your Mr. L-Soap stuff, your metaphors, repetition, list, similes, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, hyperbole, superlatives, all of those things. So you can't just use one or two. So in order to get the top marks, you have to use a range of language devices. And when you use language devices, you've got to use them well. So making sure that the language devices and the images that you are creating help to support and build on the specific atmosphere or tone that you're trying to create in your writing. The second part of that is the organization. So that's your use of structural features. So whereas content is about maybe the language, you can think of organization as the structure. Are you writing in chronological order? Are there flashbacks? Now, using the drop, shift, zoom, stop link that we practice in class will help you in terms of ticking off those structural features. So you can think about using that structure, but also it's really, really important that you are using paragraphs correctly. So that's your organization. The other part is your technical accuracy. So it's using your spelling, punctuation, and grammar correctly so that people can understand what it is that you're writing. So your sentence demarcation is talking about your use of full stops correctly. So you're not what we call comma splicing, just sentences that run on and on and on by adding in more and more commas. You're using a wide range of punctuation, so not just commas and full stops, but you're punctuating speech correctly, maybe using exclamation marks, question marks, colons, semicolons, ellipsis, dashes, all of those things to showcase your level of knowledge of punctuation. A full range of appropriate sentence forms means that you can use a range of simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. So you're using a combination of all of those for effect. So just like in the extract, when the man says, "you have," that really short, simple sentence, or it's almost a kind of fragment of a sentence, but you can show that you're using a range. You also need to show a high level of spelling, including more ambitious vocabulary. It's more important to use ambitious vocabulary because you'll get more marks for trying to use it than you will lose for spelling it incorrectly. So if you can think of a really ambitious, sophisticated word, but you're just not sure how to spell it as best you can, spell it phonetically, and you will still get marks for using ambitious vocab. So here is an example. It's obviously not a full example, it's just a little extract, but you can see where I've tried to include structural features and language devices. So this is the same extract. All I've done here is I've color-coded the assessment objective 6 stuff, all the technical accuracy stuff for you to have a look at. So using commas correctly, semicolons, apostrophes, speech marks, etc., and a variety of sentence forms. So the first task for the question 5 dirt is to find 3 more ambitious words for cold, angry, and dark. So use your thesaurus. It can either be a paper thesaurus if you have one at home, or just look online. You can Google synonyms for those words and come up with some really ambitious vocab. Okay, worryingly, there's quite a few of you who are still not using apostrophes correctly. So apostrophes for contractions like don't or can't or won't, I'm just putting down to sheer laziness. Make sure you do that. The second time that you're not using apostrophes correctly is for possession. And so for that, I want you to complete this second dirt task. Now, it's important that when the person is singular, then you put the apostrophe at the end and then add the S. When there is plural, for example, if you had more than one brother, so if you had brothers, you would put the apostrophe after the S and you don't need to add another S. Okay, so make sure you're putting the apostrophe in the correct place. Now, when it comes to it's, it is, or it has, then it's it apostrophe S, but you do not need an apostrophe for it when it is possession. It is an exception to the rule. So you are only using an apostrophe for its if it is short for it is, or it has, or it was. Okay, this next task is to get you using colons and semicolons correctly. It will just help you use a wider range of punctuation. So if you read the blue box, it will tell you when it is appropriate to use a colon, and then have a go at putting in the colons in the red box. This is the second part of task 3, semicolons. Again, read the blue box, it will tell you when it's appropriate to use a semicolon, and then have a go at putting the semicolons into those sentences in the red box. Task 4 is all about helping you to think about how you start your sentences. It's really important that you're using a range of sentence openers. So on the side here, I've listed all different ways that you might want to start a sentence, but generally, most of you start your sentences with nouns or noun phrases. That's quite normal, but it does make your writing less interesting. So I would like you to look at your question 5, find 2 sentences that begin with a noun or a noun phrase, and rewrite them so that they either begin with an adverb, an adjective, a verb, or a preposition. This next task is getting you to use a range of language devices. A lot of you are really comfortable using similes. Some of you are getting better at alliteration, but there's a whole load of other language devices that you should be using. So what I have advised students in the past is just to write Mr. Elsoap at the top of your question page and just tick off the devices as you use them. What I would like you to do for this task is I'm going to give you some sentences. You're going to rewrite them so that they use a language device. This is an example. So he walked along the path that was only lit partially by the street lamps that flickered on and off, which is a fine sentence within itself, but I want you to change it so that it's using a language device. So you could change it into something like, the intermittent flashes of light kissed the pavement around his shoes as he strutted along the narrow concrete dance floor. So there I've got personification of delight, and I've got a metaphor of the path being a concrete narrow dance floor. So now go ahead and rewrite these 4 sentences. Make sure that you're including a language device, and you can challenge yourself and try to use more than one device per sentence. It's up to you, but at least try to write these 4 with a different language device. So don't make them all similes or all personification. Use different language devices for each one of these sentences. This last task is to get you to punctuate speech correctly. So on this slide, you'll see lots of rules that we have to follow when we punctuate speech. So read through this slide, and then there's a task for you to complete on the next slide. So now you're going to rewrite these sentences, and you're going to punctuate the speech correctly within them. If you're not sure, go back to the previous slide and check the rules. Okay, that marks the end of this PPE experience for you. I'm hoping that you found this reflection really useful. Can you please make sure you take a picture of your work, or you scan it, or if you've typed it, that you save it to the correct folder in iLearn, and that's it. Please keep this paper and all your feedbacks. It's good for revision, and I'll probably want to have a look at it when we come back to school. Next, we're going to move on to finishing Macbeth Act 5.